Hope Valley was the kind of Texas town where nothing stayed secret for long, but for a while, something did. The town had one blinking traffic light, a diner called Helen's that served cherry pie with a side of unsolicited life advice, and a church that had stood for over a century, the First Baptist Church of Hope Valley. Its brick walls had absorbed generations of whispered prayers and silent regrets. So when Reverend Paul Hargrove retired after 42 faithful years of preaching fire and grace, the congregation held its collective breath waiting to see who would take the pulpit next. Enter Reverend David Clark. He wasn't what anyone expected. Young, maybe in his late 30s, tall, sharp-featured, with a preacher's voice that could make a grocery list sound like a psalm. His wife Deborah and their 2 children stayed behind in Austin until the school year finished, he explained. That raised some brows. So did his handsomeness. So did his confidence. But when he preached that first Sunday, nobody cared. The man could talk. His sermons weren't just lectures, they were electric. He spoke of redemption, of longing, of the human heart's deep thirst for love and truth. People left the pews feeling like they'd been seen. One of them was Brittany Mitchell. Brittany had lived in Hope Valley all her life. At 32, she had 2 kids, Jason and Emily, and a husband, Chase, who ran an auto repair shop on the edge of town. To everyone else, Brittany had the life most people envied: a good man, well-behaved kids, a neat house with a swing on the porch. But inside, things weren't so tidy. Brittany had dreams once. She had gone to college in Dallas, studying early childhood education, hoping to become a teacher. But love, or what she thought was love, happened fast. She married Chase at 20 and gave birth to Jason within the year. Her life had been a series of sacrifices ever since. Chase was decent, kind, but distant. He worked long hours, rarely noticed when she dyed her hair, never asked about her books or her thoughts. They were, in every way, a functioning machine without warmth, without friction. Just motion. When Brittany first heard Reverend Clark speak, something stirred. He talked about emotional hunger in one of his first sermons. Not lust, not romance, something deeper. Something gnawed at the edges of her soul. He described the aching of a soul starved of connection. When she shook his hand at the end of the service, their eyes met, just a moment too long. It wasn't just Brittany who noticed. Her best friend Martha Wells, the church secretary for over 20 years, pulled her aside the next week. "I have to tell you something," Martha said quietly, sipping coffee in Brittany's kitchen. "Last week Reverend Clark asked me about you." "About me?" Brittany blinked. "Where you worked before you got married. If you went to college. Things like that." Brittany's heart beat a little faster. "And what did you say?" "I said you went to college for 2 years, then married Chase and had Jason." "But Brittany, I've never seen a pastor take that much interest in a parishioner." "Not like that. Maybe he just wants to understand his congregation better." "Maybe," Martha replied, unconvinced. "But be careful. I've heard stories, you know. Some preachers, their charm can be dangerous." Brittany laughed it off, but something had already shifted inside her. She began attending every Sunday service without fail. Volunteered to help with the church's children's ministry. Stayed late. Brought homemade cookies. It felt innocent at first. One afternoon, David asked if she could meet him to discuss the curriculum for the children's Bible study. It was a small thing, routine even. But instead of the church office, he suggested the cafe on the edge of town. More relaxed, he said. She lied to Chase. Told him she had a dentist appointment in Tyler. David was already there when she arrived, sitting in a booth in the back corner, nursing a coffee. He smiled as she slid into the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know I put you in an awkward position." Brittany tried to deflect. "We're just talking about Sunday school, right?" But his eyes were steady. "No. I need to talk about something else." He paused, then continued. "I can't stop thinking about you. About what's happening between us." "David," she began, but he held up a hand. "I've prayed. I've asked God to take these feelings away. But he hasn't." And I don't think I want him to. Brittany should have walked out. Every cell in her body screamed that this was a line they couldn't uncross. But instead, she sat there, heart pounding, breath shallow. "You're married," she said. "So are you," he replied. "But are you happy, Brittany?" She looked down. The question hit harder than expected. "Chase is a good man." "That's not what I asked." "No," she whispered. "I don't think I am. But I can't destroy my family." David leaned closer. "What if I told you there's another way?" Brittany didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. When she left the cafe, her hands were trembling. A week later, they met again. This time in a hotel room 20 miles outside of town. Brittany Mitchell, a devoted wife, a mother of two, a woman who once dreamed of teaching children, crossed a line she would never uncross. She didn't feel shame at first. Just release. Like her life had been black and white until now, and suddenly the world had color. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it felt dangerously close. That night, as she drove home through the winding Texas roads, her wedding ring felt colder than usual on her finger. And back in town, Hope Valley slept quietly, blissfully unaware that one of its own had just lit a match that would soon set everything ablaze. The first lie is the hardest. After that, they come easier, more fluid, more convincing, especially when whispered into darkness, where guilt can't find you. Brittany sat at the kitchen table the next morning, a coffee mug warm in her hands, pretending to read the church bulletin. Chase was talking about car parts again. Something about a radiator, or maybe a carburetor. She wasn't listening. She nodded when he looked up, smiled when he smiled. It was easy. Too easy. The lie had already started wrapping itself around her life like ivy, tight, green, living. And dangerous. David didn't call or text. That was part of the unspoken rule. No contact outside the moments they carved out of the ordinary. No trace. Nothing that could be screenshotted or overheard. Brittany should have felt relief. But all she felt was hunger. When he finally approached her again, it wasn't at a motel or a cafe, it was inside the church itself. It was a Wednesday, and she was folding donation clothes in the basement. The door creaked open, and she turned, expecting Martha. But it was David. "We need to talk," he said simply. Not hello. Not a smile. Just that. Serious, firm. Brittany set down the baby onesie in her hands, heart pounding. The basement smelled like dust and bleach, and the old water heater let out a slow hiss behind them. "We can't meet in town anymore," he said. "Someone's asking questions." "Who?" she asked. Martha. Of course it was Martha. She saw everything, especially what people didn't want her to. "She asked why you were at the Pine Hills Hotel last month," David said, lowering his voice. "Apparently, Bob Wilson's wife saw you in the parking lot." Panic prickled the back of Brittany's neck. "She thinks it was innocent, for now," he added. "But we need to be careful." They agreed on a new location, an abandoned house 2 roads past Miller Farm. It was old, decrepit, but private. The key sat under a flower pot no one had touched in 20 years. They met there once a week, always at odd hours. And every time they touched, it felt a little more like possession, less like romance. The walls were cracking, the windows fogged, and yet it became the temple of their sins. But sin never stays buried for long. 2 months in, Brittany began to feel off. She chalked it up to guilt, stress, maybe even paranoia. But the nausea came like clockwork, mornings especially. Her body ached. Her appetite disappeared. Her period didn't show. The denial lasted longer than it should have. Until one Thursday afternoon, she bought a test from a gas station 2 towns over and took it in the grimy restroom behind the diner. 2 lines. The world narrowed. She sat on the toilet lid, her palms pressed to her cheeks, feeling her life unravel strand by strand. She waited 3 days before telling David. They met at the abandoned house. He looked tired, edgy. She expected shock or maybe warmth. What she got was calculation. 8 weeks, she said. "I'm sure." He didn't respond at first. Just paced. Then stopped. What are you going to do? He asked, not we. Brittany flinched. I thought we'd decide together. David let out a harsh breath. Brittany, I have a reputation. A career. If this gets out, what happened to soulmates and divine love? She shot back. Love is one thing. A baby is another. There it was. Stripped down to the bone. He offered solutions. Discreet clinics. Distant cities. Names of doctors who didn't ask questions. Brittany stared at him, eyes wide, unblinking. You're suggesting I get an abortion? She asked. I'm suggesting damage control, he said coldly. You knew what this was. We both did. That was the moment she saw him, really saw him. Not the preacher. Not the prophet. Just a man. Selfish. Terrified. Ready to erase her to save himself. Brittany stood, fists clenched. I'll take care of it. But we're done. David didn't argue. He simply nodded. Too quickly. A week later, she booked an appointment at a women's clinic in Dallas. Under a false name. She arranged childcare. Told Chase she was going shopping with Martha. She packed tissues and a Bible and promised herself it would be the last time she lied. But fate had other plans. The night before her appointment, David called. She didn't pick up. He called again. Then again. Finally, she answered, furious. What? She hissed. Martha suspects everything. She confronted me after Bible study. She asked directly if we were involved. Brittany felt the floor shift under her. What did you tell her? I told her you were struggling spiritually. That you confessed something personal. That I was afraid you might hurt yourself. Silence. You set the stage, she said. He didn't deny it. You're trying to build a narrative where I kill myself out of guilt. Again, silence. And that's when she knew he was planning something darker. Something final. The next morning, she didn't go to Dallas. She went to church. She dressed carefully. Not for David. For herself. Today, she would end it. She would tell Chase the truth, or something close to it. Say she was pregnant. Say she hoped it was his. She would cut ties with David completely. But when she got to church, the air felt wrong. David's sermon was eerie, cryptic. He spoke of temptation and consequence, of hidden sins and heavy crosses. Several times, his eyes lingered on her not with longing, but with threat. After service, Chase took the kids home. Brittany said she'd talk to Martha about the church picnic. Instead, she went to the pastor's office. David was there. Waiting. He locked the door behind her. I know you've decided to keep the baby, he said. She said nothing. I also know you plan to tell your husband it's his. Her breath hitched. You're not a good liar, Brittany. What do you want? She whispered. To stop the scandal, he said calmly. Then he opened the desk drawer. And took out a gun. The world tilted. Sound faded. Brittany stared at the weapon. Small. Real. Terrifying. You're insane. I'm practical. If you kill yourself, the story ends. You couldn't bear the guilt. I did all I could to save you. You're going to murder me and call it suicide? He nodded toward the notepad on the desk. You're going to write the note. I'll even help with the wording. Brittany's legs nearly gave out. Her vision blurred. Her child kicked soft, insistent. David, please. Write. And with trembling hands, she picked up the pen. Sometimes survival begins with a pen. Brittany stared at the notepad, the blue lines blurring through tears. Her fingers trembled around the pen David had shoved into her palm. He stood a few feet away, watching her like a wolf might watch its prey bleed, cold, focused, waiting for it to collapse. Start with, I'm sorry, he said flatly, pacing. Make it emotional. Mention Chase. Mention guilt. Mention God. I can't, she whispered. You can. And you will. She lowered her eyes, trying to breathe, trying to stall. Every second mattered. Every second was borrowed. She wrote slowly. I'm sorry, Chase. I'm sorry I betrayed you. The words felt like acid on her tongue. Each letter dragged like a chain across her soul. She tried not to look at the gun. But it was there, waiting, its presence heavier than the air between them. David leaned over her shoulder. Add something about the baby, he said. They need to believe you were too ashamed to bring it into this world. A flash of fury rose in her throat. She swallowed it down. And what about the people who saw us? She asked carefully. Martha. Linda. Bob Wilson's wife. I've handled Martha, David said. Told her you confessed. Sexual sins. Told her I was worried you might harm yourself. He smiled, as if proud of his cleverness. And Bob Wilson's wife? Brittany pressed. Chase already mentioned it at breakfast. You denied it, remember. His tone was mocking. It's all lining up. You're overwhelmed. Guilt-ridden. The perfect tragic tale. You're going to stage a suicide in your own church basement? No, he said. You're going to. His words dropped like a stone. Final. Cold. Then footsteps. A creak from above. A voice calling down from the hallway. Reverend Clark? Brittany? Are you down there? It was Martha. David froze. Brittany's pulse surged. Hope, sharp and unexpected, rushed through her veins. Don't answer, David hissed. But it was too late. Brittany. Martha's voice was closer. I saw Chase and the kids leave. I thought you were going to talk to me about the church picnic. The door rattled. Then a knock. Why is this locked? David's face drained of color. Martha, Brittany called out. Help me. He's got it. Before she could finish, David lunged toward her. He grabbed her wrist, yanked the pen away, and clamped a hand over her mouth. Shut up, he growled. But outside the door, Martha was no fool. She had already heard enough. I'm calling the sheriff, she shouted. David panicked. He bolted for the door. Brittany stumbled back, gasping for air. He fumbled with the lock, cursing under his breath. But the key was stuck. She grabbed the heavy glass vase from the table, used for flowers during weddings and funerals, and swung it. The impact was sickening. Bone met glass. David crumpled with a groan, clutching his head as blood ran down his temple. The gun slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The door burst open. Martha, wielding a brass candlestick like a medieval weapon, froze at the scene, David on the ground, groaning, Brittany wide-eyed, blood on her blouse. He was going to kill me, Brittany sobbed. Martha didn't wait. She stepped over David, picked up the gun with shaking hands, and aimed it at him. You move, I swear to God I'll knock what little sense you have left out of you. David groaned, trying to sit up. She attacked me, shut up. Martha barked. You locked the door. You had a gun. That's enough for me. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed the sheriff. Within 20 minutes, the church was swarming with law enforcement. Sheriff Jim Raymond arrived in his khaki uniform, his Stetson soaked from the rain, disbelief etched across his weathered face. David was taken to the hospital under police supervision. Brittany, wrapped in a fleece blanket and clutching a half-written suicide note, was driven to the station. They placed her in a small, cold interrogation room. The buzz of fluorescent lights filled the silence. Sheriff Raymond sat across from her. I need you to tell me everything, he said, voice firm but not unkind. And she did. She told him about the counseling sessions. The flirtation. The affair. The pregnancy. The threats. The gun. The note. She told the truth even when it made her look like a villain. Because anything less would be another lie. When she finished, the sheriff was quiet for a long time. You know what this means, right? He finally said. Your life here, your marriage, your reputation. I know, Brittany whispered. But I'm alive. That night, she went home to a house that felt colder than the station. Chase was waiting on the porch. His jaw was clenched. His eyes red. He knew. Of course, he knew. Word traveled fast in Hope Valley. Faster than forgiveness. Is it true? He asked. Yes, she said. And the baby? I don't know. Maybe it's not yours. He didn't speak, just stared into the darkening sky. What now? She asked. I don't know, he said. I really don't. Inside, the children were asleep. Emily clutched a stuffed bear. Jason's mouth hung open slightly, dreams untouched by the chaos crashing down around their family. Brittany sat at the kitchen table, hands pressed to her stomach. The baby, still growing, still innocent, still a part of this world. At the hospital, David slipped into a coma. The blow had caused a serious brain hemorrhage. The doctors weren't optimistic. The next morning, the sheriff got the call. David Clark was dead. And now, everything had changed. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a murder investigation. Hope Valley had never buried a pastor under scandal before. But they had never seen one like David Clark. The church bells rang at noon. Slow, mournful tolls echoed through the town like a verdict, one that came before the jury. The funeral was closed casket. The damage to David's head made it necessary. Some said it was symbolic, fitting even, that a man who preached about salvation behind closed doors should be buried behind one. Deborah Clark, his widow, stood by the casket in a stiff black dress, her hands clasped tightly, her face unreadable. She hadn't cried. Not once. Not in public, anyway. Beside her were her two sons, both dressed in suits too big for their small frames, their eyes darting toward the crowd rather than the coffin. Most of the congregation showed up, but not all. Some came out of duty. Some out of curiosity. Others stayed home, unsure how to mourn a man who had broken his vows in every direction possible. Brittany wasn't there. She sat in a jail cell. No orange jumpsuit yet, just her gray hoodie, frayed at the sleeves, her belly slightly visible now. 6 months pregnant. The baby moved occasionally, reminding her that, even in the darkest hour, life kept going. Outside the station, news vans began to show up. Reporters from Dallas, even as far as Houston, filled the quiet streets, seeking their next headline: Pregnant housewife kills pastor lover in church basement. Her mugshot made the evening news. The photo didn't show a murderer. It showed a woman with hollow eyes, hair pulled back hastily, a bruise on her wrist from where David had grabbed her too hard. Sheriff Raymond stood in front of the cameras, trying to keep the town from exploding. This is a developing investigation, he told them. Mrs. Mitchell has been cooperative. We ask that everyone reserve judgment until all the facts come to light. But Hope Valley didn't wait for trials. Hope Valley whispered. Some said she was a Jezebel. That she'd seduced David. That she wanted out of her marriage and saw the preacher as an easy escape. Others said she was a victim drawn in by a man who weaponized God to control the weak. The town split down the middle. Even at the diner where everyone used to talk about high school football and Sunday potlucks, the conversation shifted. They no longer smiled when Brittany's name came up. And Chase? He became the ghost who walked through it all. Fixing cars by day. Cooking mac and cheese for the kids by night. His face blank, his soul crumbling. But he hadn't left her. Not yet. 1 week after David's death, Brittany was released on house arrest. An ankle monitor. A curfew. No church. No contact with anyone related to the case. Chase picked her up quietly. In the car, she looked at him, afraid to speak. He broke the silence. They buried him today. I know, she whispered. Deborah was there. Did she say anything? No. But she looked different. Like she knew something. They didn't talk much on the drive. But when they got home, Brittany found something waiting for her, a letter. It had no return address. Just her name. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. It read, "You are not the first. You won't be the last if they don't know the truth. Speak, or more lives will be ruined." There was no signature. Chase read it too. Who would send this? I don't know, but something in her stirred. A thought she hadn't allowed herself to fully embrace until now. What if David had done this before? The next day, Sheriff Raymond called her. We got a call, he said. David Clark's widow. She wants to talk. She has something to show you. Brittany was hesitant. She said she found something, the sheriff added. About David. Might help your case. Permission was arranged. Under supervision, Brittany met Deborah Clark at the sheriff's office. Deborah looked thinner than she had at the funeral. But there was fire in her eyes now. I should have said something years ago, she began. But I was afraid of what it would mean for our boys. For me. For the church. She handed over a worn leather journal. Inside, David's handwriting. Brittany opened it. Dates. Names. Descriptions. Of women. Of manipulations. Some entries were cryptic. Others were disgustingly detailed. One was labeled B. M. Brittany Mitchell. She read the entry. Her stomach turned. David had documented everything: the first session, the hand on the shoulder, her vulnerability, the pregnancy. Then one chilling line at the bottom: B is becoming a problem. The pregnancy could ruin everything. Radical measures must be taken. Sheriff Raymond took the journal, his expression unreadable. Deborah didn't flinch. He wasn't who he said he was. And I won't protect his image anymore. That night, Brittany lay in bed, unable to sleep. The journal entry echoed in her mind. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't exaggerating. David had planned to destroy her. A week later, the DA's office filed official charges: manslaughter in excess of self-defense. Not murder. But not innocence either. Her lawyer, Susan Delaney from Tyler, came highly recommended. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for turning trials upside down. This is winnable, she told Brittany. But we'll need every ounce of truth. All of it. Even the ugliest parts. Brittany nodded. I'll tell them everything. The trial date was set, October 15th. Exactly 6 months after David Clark's death. Hope Valley had seen scandals. Affairs. Even suicides. But never this. A woman accused of killing her preacher in the church basement while carrying his child. The courtroom would be full. The world would be watching. And Brittany Mitchell would have to relive every twisted moment to save what little was left of her life. The courtroom was packed by 8:45 a.m. Locals, reporters, and church members sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to witness the slow unraveling of Hope Valley's most explosive secret. No one whispered. No one moved. The air was electric, thick with judgment, suspicion, and a morbid craving for drama. This wasn't just a trial, it was the autopsy of a community's soul. Brittany entered the courtroom quietly, escorted by her lawyer, Susan Delaney. Her gray maternity dress fit snugly over her 7-month bump. She wasn't just on trial for a crime, she was visibly carrying the consequence of it. The child growing inside her might have been innocent, but every eye in the room looked at that unborn life like evidence. Across the aisle, Deborah Clark sat alone. She wore dark glasses and clutched a folder. She didn't blink. If grief had once clouded her, it had now hardened into resolve. The judge entered. Court is now in session. The state of Texas versus Brittany Mitchell. And then it began. Prosecutor Elizabeth Carter wasted no time. Her voice was razor-sharp, cutting straight through the silence. This is not a case of a woman who fought for her life, she began. This is a case of a woman who made a series of immoral choices, who entered into an affair with a man of God, got pregnant, and when he threatened to expose the truth, she killed him. The words hung in the air like smoke. Carter gestured toward Brittany. She lied to her husband. She met in secret. She hid a pregnancy. She brought that man to his knees and then ended his life with a blow so violent, so excessive, that he never woke up again. Then it was Delaney's turn. This isn't about a crime, she said. This is about survival. About a woman manipulated by a man who used God as a weapon and fear as a leash. Brittany Mitchell didn't kill in cold blood. She fought for her life when every door had been locked and every plea ignored. The jury shifted in their seats. First witness, the coroner. Doctor. Michael Stevens described the cause of death, a cerebral hemorrhage from blunt force trauma. A vase. Heavy. Applied with tremendous force. Deliberate. But could adrenaline explain the impact? Delaney asked. Yes, he admitted. Under extreme stress, yes. Next came the bombshell. Deborah Clark took the stand. My husband was a gifted speaker, she said. But he was not a good man. Gasps echoed across the room. Even the bailiff turned his head. Deborah continued. He had affairs in 3 churches before this one. I knew. I kept quiet. But when I found his journals after his death, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. She held up the leather-bound book. In it were names, descriptions, tactics, entire pages on how to exploit spiritual counseling into seduction. One was titled B.M. It stands for Brittany Mitchell, Deborah said calmly. He wrote she was emotionally vulnerable, that she believed God had sent him to heal her. Why share this now? The prosecutor snapped. Because burying the truth won't bring him back. But letting it breathe might stop the next woman from being destroyed. Next was Martha Wells, church secretary. Friend. The woman who had saved Brittany's life. I saw the way he looked at her, Martha testified. It was never spiritual. It was hungry. She described the scene at the church. The locked door, Brittany's screams, the candlestick she used to break in. He had a gun pointed at her, she said. I saw it with my own eyes. She hit him in self-defense. That's the truth. The prosecutor tried to shake her. Are you sure you weren't just seeing what you wanted to see? Maybe they were fighting. Maybe she lost control. No, Martha replied firmly. He was going to kill her. Then came the note. Handwriting experts confirmed Brittany wrote it. But a behavioral linguist was called in by the defense. The language in this note is highly formulaic, he explained. It mimics traditional guilt-based confessions often found in suicide cases. The emotional cadence does not match Brittany Mitchell's natural speech patterns. In short, it reads like a dictated note. The judge allowed it into evidence. Then, finally, it was Brittany's turn. She stood slowly, placing a hand on her stomach for balance. Delaney asked softly, "Tell us how it started." Brittany's voice trembled, but it didn't falter. He told me I was special, she began. That God had sent him to help me. At first, it felt like hope. Then it became something else. It felt wrong, but he told me it was part of God's plan. She recounted everything. The meetings. The touches. The moment she realized she was pregnant. And what did he say when you told him? Brittany swallowed. He panicked. He said I had to get rid of it. That he couldn't risk his reputation. And when you said no? Her voice cracked. He turned cold. Then cruel. He locked the door. Pulled out a gun. Told me to write a note. What kind of note? A suicide note. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Delaney pressed on. Why didn't you scream? I did. Martha heard. That's why I'm still alive. The prosecution didn't hold back during cross-examination. You expect us to believe that a grown woman, mother of 2, fell into an affair with a preacher and then had no idea what she was doing? I knew it was wrong, Brittany admitted. But I didn't know he was dangerous until it was too late. Yet you met him in a hotel. Yes. You lied to your husband. Yes. You were going to let him raise another man's child? Yes, Brittany said again, her voice steady now. Because I was desperate. But that doesn't mean I deserve to die. The final witness was Chase. He stood tall. Resigned. Tired. I know what my wife did, he said. And it broke me. But I also know she's not a killer. Why are you still here? The prosecutor asked. Chase looked at Brittany. Because I failed her too. I didn't see how alone she felt. We both made mistakes. But only one of us ended up in a basement with a gun to her head. As the courtroom adjourned for the day, tension crackled in the air. The town wanted answers. The jury wanted clarity. But this case was no longer about facts. It was about who people believed. The trial was far from over. And the verdict? Still a whisper in the shadows. The sun rose on the sixth day of the trial with blood-orange fury, casting long shadows over the Henderson County Courthouse. By the time court resumed at 9 a.m., the crowd outside had doubled. The gossip mills of Hope Valley weren't just spinning, they were on fire. Local radio hinted at a mistrial. Church elders whispered that a confession might surface. But none of that mattered now. The truth, or what resembled it, was being carved inside courtroom walls. The defense had one final card to play. They called Dr. Robert Fields, a forensic psychiatrist and an expert on religious manipulation. He didn't dress like a typical academic. Wore cowboy boots. Spoke with a slight Texan drawl. But his words were anything but rustic. Reverend David Clark displayed a textbook pattern of spiritual coercion, Dr. Fields said, adjusting his glasses. He used religious authority not as a tool for healing but for control. That's not spirituality. That's abuse wrapped in scripture. He pointed to documented notes from David's journals, phrases like emotional entry point, grief, husband inattentive, and she trusts me as a divine vessel. He wasn't just charming, Fields continued. He engineered belief. That's how cult leaders operate. He isolated Brittany, built emotional dependency, then exploited it. The prosecution objected. Speculation. The judge overruled. Then came the closing statements. Elizabeth Carter's voice was icy and methodical. Her strategy now was clear: reduce everything to logic. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we do not deny that Reverend Clark had faults. We do not deny that he engaged in an inappropriate relationship. But bad morals are not a license to kill. Brittany Mitchell hit a man with such force that it fractured his skull. That was not self-defense. That was panic. That was rage. And someone died because of it. She paused dramatically. Let's not forget, she lied about the affair. Lied about the pregnancy. Lied to her husband. Why should we believe she told the truth only when it suited her? Then came Susan Delaney. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight like thunder. Brittany Mitchell was not just fighting for her life, she was fighting for the life of her unborn child. Imagine this. You're locked in a room. The man in front of you, who once held your hand in prayer, now holds a gun. He tells you to write your own suicide note. You cry. You beg. No one hears you. And when the door creaks, you see a glimmer of hope. You act. You survive. She looked each juror in the eye. This isn't about whether she made mistakes. She did. It's about whether a woman who's cornered, manipulated, threatened, and pregnant has the right to fight back. She didn't attack. She survived. The jury retired to deliberate at 4:12 p.m. The courthouse waited. 5 hours passed. Dusk rolled in. Phones buzzed with rumors, but the doors to the jury room stayed shut. Finally, at 9:06 p.m., the bailiff returned. They've reached a verdict. Everyone stood. Brittany's hands were cold. Chase reached for them. Their fingers barely touched. The jury foreman, a retired librarian named Edna Taylor, stood. On the charge of first-degree murder, she read, "We find the defendant not guilty." A wave of relief washed over Brittany. But Edna wasn't done. On the charge of second-degree murder, not guilty. Whispers erupted. But then came the third charge. On the charge of manslaughter in excess of the limits of self-defense, guilty. Gasps echoed like thunder. The judge took a deep breath before pronouncing the sentence. Given the circumstances, including the psychological manipulation, the immediate threat to life, and the defendant's cooperation with law enforcement, I sentence Brittany Mitchell to 2 years probation with mandatory psychological counseling. No prison time. A moment of stunned silence. Then chaos. One woman in the back began clapping. Another shouted, "She got away with murder." Chase held Brittany as she wept, not because she was free, but because she wasn't broken. Outside, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters crowded around. But Brittany said nothing. She had already said everything that mattered. The next day, Brittany, Chase, and the kids packed what they could into a U-Haul. They were leaving Hope Valley behind, not out of shame, but because healing can't grow in poisoned soil. Their new home? Austin. A place where no one knew them. Where judgment hadn't already been written on mailboxes and church pews. 3 weeks later, in a quiet hospital room, Brittany gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Grace. Grace had David's dark hair. But Chase's eyes. And despite everything, Chase signed the birth certificate as her father. A secret he never shared, not with Brittany, not with anyone. Because sometimes love isn't about blood. It's about choice. It was the first Christmas in Austin. The tree was secondhand, the ornaments mismatched, and the garland was made from popcorn and dental floss, but to Brittany, it felt more magical than any holiday she'd had in years. Grace was 3 weeks old, Jason had just lost his first tooth, and Emily had stopped asking when they'd go back to Hope Valley. They were rebuilding. Not from scratch, but from scars. But even in a city full of strangers, the past has long legs and a sharp tongue. The first shadow fell when Chase came home from work and found a letter on the kitchen counter. No stamp. No envelope. Just his name in looping handwriting. You may have left Hope Valley, but the truth follows. There was no signature. He didn't tell Brittany. He burned the note in the sink and turned the fan on. But something shifted inside him, an unease that curled up in his chest like a sleeping snake. Meanwhile, Brittany was unraveling in her own way. Grace was colicky. Nights were endless. Sleep came in 30-minute doses and guilt came in tidal waves. She had survived, yes, but at what cost? Her marriage, her town, her name. Even in Austin, people Googled. Some whispered. One woman at the grocery store looked at her for just a second too long. And then, just when it seemed things were settling, Brittany received a message request on Facebook. Deborah Clark. Her heart seized. The message was short. I'd like to talk. There are things you don't know. Brittany waited 3 days before replying. They agreed to meet at a park near the university. Neutral ground. Wide open space. Deborah was thinner, paler. Her eyes had the hollow look of someone who had finally stopped crying after months of not stopping. I almost didn't come, Brittany admitted, clutching her coffee like a shield. I almost didn't ask, Deborah replied. But truth deserves its moment. And then she told her. Everything. David hadn't just manipulated Brittany. There were at least 3 other women. 1 in Dallas. 2 in New Mexico. He followed the same pattern: emotional vulnerability, spiritual intimacy, escalating control. I knew, Deborah said. Not at first. But by the second church, I started finding letters, receipts, little pieces of women's lives hidden in his desk. Why didn't you say anything? Brittany whispered. Because the church believed him, not me. And I had kids. A mortgage. And shame. A mountain of shame. She handed Brittany a small leather-bound journal. David's final entries. They might help you understand the man he became. Or the man he always was. Brittany took it. Not out of curiosity. Out of obligation. But when she opened it later that night, she found something she hadn't expected. A confession. Not to the affairs. Not to the manipulation. To a death. Not his. A woman named April. One of the first. She had threatened to expose him. Said she was going to the church board. David had followed her. There was a struggle. She fell down a flight of stairs in her apartment building. I told the police she was drunk. That she slipped. They believed me. Brittany closed the journal and trembled. She was not the first. She might not have survived had Martha not arrived that day. Chase found her in the nursery, holding Grace tightly, rocking back and forth. What is it? He asked. She showed him the journal. He read the entry 3 times. Then he said, quietly, we need to go to the police. But Brittany shook her head. No. Deborah should do it. She deserves that closure. I've had mine. He didn't argue. Instead, he held her. And for a moment, The ache inside both of them dulled. But the past wasn't finished. 2 days later, Brittany opened the mailbox and found an envelope addressed to Mrs. Mitchell. Inside was a single photograph. Grainy, black and white, taken with a long lens. It showed her leaving the courthouse in Tyler. David's mother stood behind her, face twisted in hate. No note, just the photo. And the message was clear: we're watching. When Chase saw it, he didn't hesitate. He called a locksmith, changed every lock, installed cameras. Brittany didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table with the journal, rereading every entry. She found something else. A list of names, dates, church locations, initials. Her own name wasn't listed, but the initials B.M. appeared near the bottom, dated 2 weeks before the hotel. What haunted her more was the line under it. B.M. proving emotionally responsive. Husband inattentive. Prepping spiritual anchor. It wasn't love. It was a formula. By January, they had officially changed Grace's last name. No more Clark. She was a Mitchell. Deborah agreed. She had done the same with her kids. We can't change the past, she told Brittany, but we can decide who inherits it. Brittany started therapy. It was messy, painful, but she went. And slowly, the dreams came less frequently. The panic attacks faded. She began volunteering at a domestic violence shelter. And one day, a woman walked in, eyes red, jaw bruised, voice trembling. Brittany didn't ask her to share. She didn't quote scripture. She just sat beside her, held her hand, and said, "You're not crazy. You're not alone. And you can survive this." Because she knew. Because she had. And that was the beginning of her redemption, not from the world, but from herself. She had been broken, used, nearly killed, but not destroyed. And now, piece by piece, she was becoming whole again. You think moving cities ends the whispers. You think new neighbors and blank stares are enough to reset the past. But some stories refuse to die quietly, especially when those who carry them still walk among the living. It was early spring in Austin when the first reporter knocked. He was young, nervous, with a camera bag slung over his shoulder and the unmistakable glint of ambition in his eyes. Brittany opened the door holding Grace, now 5 months old, and didn't need to ask what he wanted. "You're Brittany Mitchell, right?" he asked, rehearsed smile cracking under her stare. "I'm working on a podcast series about spiritual abuse. Your story is." She shut the door before he could finish. The next morning, 3 news vans were parked at the end of the block. One neighbor brought cookies. Another left a typed note that simply read, "We don't judge." But the attention sparked something darker, an email from someone calling themselves Shepherd's son. "You weren't the only one, but you were the only one who survived. Don't make the rest of us suffer for your silence." Attached was a file, a PDF of David's journal, every name, every comment, every date, and dozens more not mentioned before. Brittany sat frozen at her desk, scrolling line after line, each entry more grotesque than the last. A.L. Emotionally needy, father abandoned family, potential target. T.R. Flirty, insecure about weight, invite to prayer counseling. It wasn't a diary. It was a predator's manual. She showed it to Chase. He went pale. "We need to give this to someone," he said. "The authorities. The press. Anyone." But Brittany hesitated. "What if I become the face of this? Again? What if they come for us again?" Chase didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because that night, a brick came through the window. It landed in the nursery. Grace wasn't hurt, but the message was clear. Someone didn't want the past unburied. The police came, took statements, installed a patrol car on their street for 3 days, then left. But fear doesn't leave with flashing lights. The next day, Deborah called. "You need to know something," she said, voice taut. "I think someone's following me. I saw a man outside the kids' school yesterday. And today, my tires were slashed. Brittany's stomach twisted. Do you think it's someone connected to David? Deborah's voice cracked. I think it's someone protecting his image. Or trying to. She wasn't wrong. The next time Brittany checked the mailbox, she found a photograph. Not of her. Of Chase. Taken from across the street while he was locking up his new garage. A red X was drawn across his chest. Brittany finally called Sheriff Raymond in Hope Valley. We left for a reason, she told him. But it's not letting us go. Raymond was calm but firm. Brittany, I kept copies of everything. That journal, those church files, even the voicemail David left you the week before he died. I always believed there was more to this. Let me reopen it as a broader investigation. Won't that make everything public again? It already is, he said. The only question is whether you control the narrative or someone else does. 3 days later, Brittany stood at a podium in a crowded conference room at the Travis County Sheriff's Office. Flanked by Chase and Deborah, she took a breath. And then she told everything. About David. About the manipulation. About the other victims. I'm not proud of the choices I made, she said. But silence won't protect us. Not anymore. The press ran with it. Reverend's widow and mistress joined forces to expose scandal. Texas pastor's death sparks new investigation into religious abuse. For the first time, Brittany wasn't painted as the adulteress. She was a survivor. And the world finally started to see David Clark for what he truly was. More women came forward. A former youth counselor from New Mexico. A music director's wife in Louisiana. A teenage girl whose mother had dismissed her story as teenage rebellion. Each of them carried a version of the same wound. Each of them had been told they were special, chosen, spiritually called. Each of them had been broken. One woman, initials A. L. was now a school teacher in Nevada. She sent Brittany a letter that read, "You don't know me, but I saw him destroy people. You saved more lives than you know. But healing wasn't linear. For every kind message, there was hate mail." One anonymous user sent a photo of David Clark's grave with the words, "Your fault." Forever. The Mitchells moved again. Smaller town. Quieter neighbors. Fewer Google searches. But even in that calm, the cracks would show. One evening, Chase caught Jason Googling David Clark on the iPad. The boy had read just enough to connect the dots. Was he my sister's real dad? He asked. Brittany didn't lie. Yes, she said softly. But Chase is her real father. Jason thought for a long time. Okay, he said. Just don't let him hurt her. Brittany tucked him into bed with tears in her eyes. They were all healing. But healing comes with remembering. And the world wasn't done remembering either. 6 months after the press conference, a nonprofit dedicated to exposing spiritual abuse reached out. They wanted Brittany to speak. Not as a victim, but as a voice. Brittany said no. Then yes. Because silence had nearly killed her once. She wouldn't let it win again. Some reckon justice ends with a gavel and a verdict. But for Brittany Mitchell, the real trial began long after she walked out of that courtroom in Hope Valley. There were no more court reporters scribbling in notepads, no jury boxes filled with skeptical eyes. Just her family, and a world that wasn't sure whether to forgive or keep throwing stones. The invitation came in a white envelope with gold trim. We'd be honored to have you as a keynote speaker for the National Survivors of Spiritual Abuse Conference. Brittany stared at the letter for hours. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she knew too much. How many people will be there? She finally asked the organizer over the phone. Hundreds. Maybe 1,000. Many have been through what you went through. Some, even worse. The words clung to her like fog. Worse? She'd spent the last year believing she was at rock bottom. But pain has layers. So do scars. Chase found her packing the night before the flight. You sure you want to do this? He asked, watching her fold Grace's tiny onesie into a side pocket of her bag. No, she whispered. But I think I have to. The conference was held in Chicago. Cold air, cold coffee, cold reminders that healing doesn't come with applause. Backstage, she met a woman named Lynn, who had been 20 when her youth pastor mentored her into silence. He used scripture like a weapon, Lynn told her, voice raw. I still can't open a Bible without hearing his voice. Brittany didn't respond. She just held Lynn's hand. Some things didn't need words. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage to polite claps. The spotlight hit her like a confession booth. My name is Brittany Mitchell, she began, and I used to think sin was black and white. A pause. But then I met a man who wore holiness like a mask. And I learned that some of the worst sins hide behind pulpits. The room fell silent. She spoke for 22 minutes. About shame. About power. About David Clark and how he convinced her that God's will could look like betrayal if you just prayed hard enough. About how love isn't supposed to hurt you and still call itself sacred. When she finished, no one clapped at first. Then someone stood. Then two more. Then the whole room. The ovation wasn't for a hero. It was for someone who survived the unthinkable and then told the truth anyway. After the speech, a flood of emails, calls, and even book offers arrived. But one message stood out. It came from a woman named Camille Tinsley, a former member of David's first church in Mississippi. Her subject line, I have proof he was worse than we knew. The email included 3 scanned letters, handwritten pages from another woman, Maria Sanders, dated back to 2011. The tone was eerily familiar. He says God brought us together. That my suffering is my purification. That I must keep it secret or ruin what the Lord is doing in our church. Maria had gone missing in 2013. Police labeled it suicide. Her body was never recovered. A note was found on her bed, but handwriting experts had never been consulted. It was ruled open and shut. No foul play. Until now. Camille had kept the letters, afraid to go public. But after Brittany's speech, something shifted. I think he did something to her, she wrote. And maybe not just her. Brittany took it straight to Sheriff Raymond. Within a week, he reopened the Maria Sanders case. The letters were examined by the same forensic expert who'd studied Brittany's coerced suicide note. The verdict was chilling. Maria did not write that final letter, he stated. It was staged. The investigation exploded into something bigger. Other women came forward from other states. A trail of spiritual manipulation, blackmail, and perhaps more unreported deaths now led back to David Clark. Even in death, he was unraveling. Deborah Clark was subpoenaed to provide access to her husband's remaining files. What she found in an old lockbox stunned investigators: photos, recordings, coded logs. All carefully hidden. One entry stood out. M.S. Losing control. Risk high. Consider final solution. God forgives what the world won't understand. Maria Sanders. And she wasn't the only one with initials matching victims. Investigators now believe David may have been involved in the suspicious disappearances of up to 3 other women, all ruled as suicides or missing persons over the last decade. The Department of Justice got involved. Suddenly, Brittany wasn't just a survivor. She was the key witness in a multi-state criminal probe against a man already in the ground. The irony was suffocating. The world that once vilified her now praised her courage. But the guilt? That still sat in her chest like an unspoken sentence. I should have seen it sooner, she told Chase one night as they watched Grace sleep. I should have known what he was capable of. Chase pulled her close. No one blames you. Not anymore. But Brittany blamed herself. And when Maria Sanders' mother called her and simply said, "Thank you for not letting them forget," Brittany cried in a way she hadn't since the trial. The truth had legs. It didn't just crawl out, it kicked down doors. In April, Brittany testified in a federal hearing on religious leadership accountability. In May, a new law was introduced in Texas requiring background checks and psychological evaluations for clergy in positions of power. They called it the Clark Bill. She didn't ask for that. She didn't want her name immortalized alongside his. but she understood why it mattered. Because somewhere, in some small town like Hope Valley, another David might be preaching right now. And another Brittany might be sitting in the front pew, confusing spiritual intimacy for salvation. The only way to break the cycle was to name it, to drag it into the light, and let it burn. You'd think that after the speeches, the trials, the headlines, the pain would start to fade. That the ghosts would stop whispering. But pain, when laced with betrayal, doesn't evaporate, it lingers like a perfume no one meant to wear. Especially in Hope Valley, where silence has always been louder than screams. 3 years had passed since the vase hit David Clark's skull. Since that stained carpet in the church office soaked up more than blood, it drank secrets, lies, and the end of innocence. Brittany Mitchell stood in front of that same church now, older, heavier with knowing, holding the hand of a child who bore the man's eyes, but not his name. Grace was 4. Her dark curls bounced as she ran ahead, chasing butterflies between the graves in the small cemetery beside First Baptist. Brittany watched her and felt both awe and ache. The girl was light and laughter, but also a breathing reminder of a story the town had buried but never forgotten. They were visiting Hope Valley for one reason. Chase's father had passed away. A stroke, sudden and swift. He hadn't spoken to them much after the trial, but he loved his grandchildren in his own quiet, awkward way. At the funeral, Brittany wore a black dress and a mask of dignity. Some eyes welcomed her. Others judged. She was used to both. After the service, as people milled about, she found herself cornered by Bob Wilson, the man whose wife had first seen her at the hotel. "I just wanted to say," he began, rubbing his neck awkwardly, "I was wrong about you." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "I believed the gossip," he admitted. "I thought you were just another scandal. But you were fighting for your life." That took guts. Brittany nodded, emotion knotting in her throat. "Thank you." "Also," he added, lowering his voice, "Martha sends her love. She's in Houston now. Volunteers at a women's shelter. Says you inspired her." The ripples, it seemed, had kept spreading. Later that day, as the sun dropped behind the church steeple, Chase stood beside Brittany under the tree where they'd first kissed in high school. "I got a call last week," he said. "From who?" "Grace's school. They want to test her for advanced placement. Her IQ's off the charts." Brittany laughed through a sob. "Of course it is." He took her hand. "She's got your fire." And he paused. "I know he's her biological father. But she's ours. Always will be." Brittany didn't answer. She just leaned her head against his shoulder, listening to the wind weave between the headstones. They didn't stay in Hope Valley long. A few days later, they packed up and returned to Austin. But something had changed in Brittany. A quiet resolve. A whisper from somewhere deep inside telling her that the story wasn't over, not really. She began writing a memoir. It wasn't for fame. She turned down every major publishing house that wanted to sensationalize the title. She self-published it under the name, A Fire Beneath the Steeple. It spread like wildfire among survivors groups, faith circles, and women's rights organizations. Within months, Brittany was invited to Washington, D.C. to participate in a panel on abuse of spiritual authority. She sat beside senators and scholars, but it was her voice that carried weight. Because she had lived it. Because she survived when she was never meant to. And because she didn't just speak, she made them feel. Back in Austin, Grace began asking questions. "Mommy, why don't I have pictures of me as a baby with you in the hospital?" Brittany froze. It was a moment she had prepared for, rehearsed 1,000 times, but still, her voice cracked when she said, "Because when you were born, Mommy was very sad. And scared." "Why?" Brittany took a deep breath. "Because someone hurt me. And then something beautiful came from something very painful. You." Grace didn't fully understand. But she hugged her mom tight, like she always did when things didn't make sense. And somehow, that was enough. One evening, as Brittany cleaned up the dinner table, Chase walked in with a letter. "It's from Deborah Clark," he said, holding the envelope like it might burn. Brittany opened it cautiously. Inside was a short note. "I've hated him. I've defended him. I've mourned him. But mostly, I've wanted to know the truth. Your book gave it to me. I'm sorry for what he did. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. Thank you for surviving. For saving others. For saving yourself." It was signed with just her first name. No return address. But it was enough. A month later, Brittany was asked to speak again, this time at a theological seminary in Dallas. They were developing a course on ethics and ministry and wanted her to help build the curriculum. She stood before a group of future pastors, young, eager, righteous. "I'm not here to scare you," she began, "but I am here to remind you that power without accountability becomes a weapon. That people trust you with their souls. Don't give them reasons to regret it." When she finished, no one clapped. Not right away. The silence was reverent. Then a standing ovation, slow and steady, like the kind that doesn't come from applause but from respect. 5 years to the day after David Clark died, Brittany visited his grave. She brought no flowers. Just a folded note. She placed it on the stone and whispered, "This ends with me." The note read, "You didn't get to define me. I did that myself. I was your victim. But I became my own hero. And now I speak for every woman who never had a voice. Rest in truth. Because the lies died with you." She turned and walked away. Not in bitterness. Not in triumph. But in peace. Because in the end, the truest form of justice isn't just punishment. It's healing.